Hello, this is Natasha Harrison. I am founder of For Her, a Black Women Giving Movement for Black Girls. And I also have with me Joy Webb.
Hi, I'm Joy Webb. I am founder of the Circle of Joy based in Atlanta, Georgia. And Tracey?
Hi, and I'm Tracey Green Washington. I'm the founder of CoThinkk, which is a giving circle based in Asheville, North Carolina, with a footprint that spans across Western North Carolina.
And we are excited. We are representing the council, and we are excited to begin providing some nuggets to help you begin conversations that center racial equity in your giving circle practice.
One of the things that we want to do, and actually we want to do 5 things on this call. We want to give you an opportunity to talk about what actually is racial equity at a high level. We also want to talk about why it's important. Then we want to drop down into the space and really talk about what racial equity will enable you to do differently in your giving circle work, and how you will have to move differently as a result of knowing more, having a deeper analysis around these issues. And then we want to take you to a space of really talking about a couple of next steps that can support your work as you move forward.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start with, what is racial equity?
So how I think about racial equity is if the way that I look is no longer a determinant in the outcomes for people that look like me and myself, right? That you couldn't predict the outcome in my life because I'm Black. So that's how I think about racial equity. How about you, Joy, Tracey?
For me, one of the things that's always a conversation around racial equity is this distinction between diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. So diversity is very much about bringing diverse identities into a room. So anytime any of us comes in a room, the room instantly becomes diverse. Right. And when you're talking about inclusion, you're talking about people having voice and the sense of belonging in structures and institutions and communities that we all interact with every day. But equity is very different, and particularly racial equity is different, because equity is about changing the structure and the systems and communities and within our institutions that we work within. And when you unpack the data relative to race and talk about who is disproportionately impacted, that's when you get to talking about racial equity.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely a true statement. Definitely a little bit different than just a regular typical DEI statement. So this conversation is not necessarily trying to make everything pretty, because racial equity can get a little bit uncomfortable. If we went on to the next thing, why is it important that we have racial equity?
I think for me, something that I like to center Ubuntu, which is this idea, I am because you are or we are. And so I think it's important because we, as a society, our communities, if not every person in our community is thriving, then I'm not thriving. Mm-hmm. And so I think about the connectedness, interconnectedness with my brothers and sisters in my community, however, whatever race they are. And if they are not well, I'm not well. So it's so important because, we can only go as high as our most marginalized, right? And so, and the reality is, because of racial disparities, we haven't really lived up to the full potential of this idea of America.
Yeah. I think that's really beautiful, Natasha, in terms of how you talked about it. And I will also add that when we talk about why it's important, is this reality that you moved into this giving circle work because you wanted to change something. Mm-hmm. And when you unpack the issues that you want to address, disproportionately people of color, particularly Black and brown people, are impacted in this way. And so one of the things that I really would encourage you to do is really pull up the case for racial equity that the Kellogg Foundation did a couple of years ago. It's an amazing case study that talks about the argument and the business case of why you should address racial equity and what it will enable you to do. And what I found that there's 3 really salient arguments for really focusing on racial equity. It allows you to be more strategic. There's a more argument for it that we are our brother's keepers and we have to be supporting each other in that way. And there's an economic imperative that you can't deny in terms of the numbers of resources that could go back into our communities to allow them to thrive. So I would encourage you, looking at our conversation, to pull up that document, because it will provide some important nuggets that I think will be very important as you move forward.
And racial equity as a whole, if we think about it, we go further together. If we are separate, we can only go so far. But when we're together and we have common goals and we have equity amongst each other, we can definitely thrive and strive as we continue to make this world a better place. Go ahead, Tracey.
No, I think you're making a good point, and it moves us right into our next section of really talking about what will racial equity enable us to do differently. The reality of that, if we're going to make change in our communities, any type of change, however you want to talk about it, that you are addressing complex issues. And you have to be able to figure out how you interrupt and reimagine systems, because systems in our communities really are the structures that really keep the conditions in place that further create inequities. And so I know, as Giving Circle brothers and sisters out there, that you want to support and interrupt the type of change and create the type of change in your community. So it will allow you to kind of go deeper in those areas and really have a really good analysis around how it works in your community, so that you can use and posture your Giving Circle in a way that can be for good in your community as you move forward. Natasha?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that, that's very important, definitely for me, I got into developing my Giving Circle because I wanted to support Black and other people of color in their community, especially those organizations, because a lot of them have the knowledge and social capital and relationships that can really bring about the social change that you're talking about, Tracey. So I think, it helps keep those Black-led and other people of color-led organizations to help them thrive, to further support their community. And what we know statistically, people of color lack the social capital and funding to really lead their organizations. And that is a racial inequity issue. Like, that's a real issue, because a lot of these folks built and developed these organizations based on their own experiences in their community. And so I think about that. That's so important. And of course, what comes with that is innovation.
Yes.
Because they know, trust me, they have the dream, they're holding the dream and the ideas, and just need, honestly, the capital to do it. A lot of times, just the capital to do it. And they have the innovation, and they know the inner workings to make things happen.
And the Giving Circle is a great niche where we can actually do that. We can actually be very intentional about giving those dollars, giving that support, giving that time, talent, and treasure to those organizations to help amplify their brand and their mission. And a lot of times they don't get the press, they don't get the notoriety. And sometimes they need a little bit of encouragement. So I have found that with working with Giving Circles for a number of years, that as we are able to give back, they are giving something back to us, and they're bettering our communities, which makes everybody's world better. And it also allows them to have exposure that they may not have had prior to being connected to with funds and with relationships and with the time and the effort that a Giving Circle could very intentionally do. So
yeah, I agree with you, Joy. Now, as we think about the last part about how do you have to move differently, Joy, I love that you led the piece of talking about intentionality. This work is intentional. It will cause you to be intentional. As a result of really centering racial equity in your Giving Circles and your work going forward, that you will have to be charged with shifting your thinking, which will shift your feelings and will shift your actions. I love the work that Barbara Love does of talking about liberatory consciousness. And she talks about, if you're going to do really transformational work, that it is this process of moving from understanding the work, to analysis, to talking about action, to talking about accountability and allyship. really having this understanding of how things operate in your community, who's at the table, who's not at the table, will be a very important part of your work. And for those for those of us that are leading giving circles that are not of color, it will cause you also to do your work, to really interrogate your whiteness and really understand what that means, and really grapple with terms like white supremacy and how it's showing up from a cultural perspective, from a context perspective, and also thinking about how it lives out in your policies and practices as you move forward.
Yeah, I also want, as folks think about, right, how do you move differently, how do you embody, I do want to lift up Ruth King, her body of work, Mindful of Race. As you begin to interrogate whiteness, she uses a mindfulness practice in helping guide people to really ask questions, be reflective of how, honestly, white supremacy and whiteness is showing up, honestly, in your thoughts and the way that you do in your body. And really, it's helpful also for Black folks who are leading giving circles too, right? Because part of what white supremacy is that we are all, furthering the tenets of it, like, and our organizations that we develop. So I definitely will offer up Ruth King as a important resource, and really through a reflective practice to kind of move through that discomfort, right? Like staying in that brave space and moving through that discomfort to go and challenge yourself, to interrogate the whiteness and also your language. As you think about that.
One of the things I love about what you talked about, Natasha, is really this importance too around creating space for brave and courageous space, right? Of really figuring out how do you invite people in a space so they're having these really hard conversations and feel safe and also courageous on the other side of it. And I think the other thing to really just lift up in talking about what you have to do differently is really this process of just being honest about where you are, right? And really having those hard conversations in your giving circle and with yourself, because through this process, you will be transformed. Yeah. Joy, did you want to say anything?
I was just going to say that you will be transformed. And this is really important because this is the foundational piece. Even if you've had a giving circle for a while and you want to reimagine, recenter it, recenter the structure so that you can be very intentional and you can be thought-provoking in the future as you give your dollars and your time and your talent. This is important, and you have to take the time to do the work, as the lady spoke about. And when you do the work, it will be uncomfortable. And as we talked earlier about white supremacy, the white norm, the process of it being normal. So even as a person of color, just because I have done this time and time again, I might feel like this is the way. But because we have giving circles and we can be very intentional about how we spend our dollars and how we use our voice, you have the opportunity to reimagine. You have the opportunity to repurpose. You have the opportunity to recenter. You have the opportunity to make the change that you want to be. So I really employ and am excited about you all taking this opportunity to really dig deep, do some great thinking. You might have to pray a little. You might have to cry a little. It will be uncomfortable. And it's good to be uncomfortable because that's when change happens.
Right. I agree. Absolutely. They say you're not growing.
Yeah, you're not growing, right?
If you're not comfortable, right?
Right. Growing pains are real.
And we all have giving circles here, so we know that this is real.
Growing pains are real.
And so in terms of the next steps, we're finding ourselves at the end of our time. We actually want to refer you back to a document that we were able to provide as a beginning guide for you to have this conversation and to call on us as needed to be able to support your work. And in the guide, we really lay out 3 important tenets to get you started. One of them is about building brave space. One of them is about dropping into understanding what this work is relative to racial equity. And Natasha, what's the last one you want to talk about?
Yeah, so chart your course to really, think about kind of where you are. We mentioned that before, but just being honest about where you are in terms of the first initial steps that you want to take. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's, we actually have, like thinking about, maybe we actually have been very centered and equitable in the work that we do. So how do we deepen that? Is it more of the advocacy? Should we be supporting, you know, more organizations around advocacy to actually change policies and laws, right, in our state, in our community. So definitely check that out. That last piece around chart your course is very important.
Yeah. We look forward to supporting you in your journey.
Yes.
Feel free to call on us or Community Investment Network, and we're here to support you as the council.
Yes, thank
All
you
right.
so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.